Jones. Robin's going to be talking to us about writing reflections. Robin is kind of our service learning expert at USF. I mean, it's not like you feel like you have grandbabies who are service learning classes, but you just are. She's been at USF about 15 years and has been really sort of the primary source of information about service learning in the College of Arts and Sciences during that time. And Robin is actually retiring on April 30th. And so this is the last opportunity to hear what she has to say about service learning. And so, of course, I couldn't pass up the chance to put her on the program. So I will also help pass out some information. And so, Robin, thank you for being here.
Okay. I noted when I first walked in and I noticed the people that were there, and usually over the years when I've come to a service learning, 101 presentation, it's sort of been the same old folks. I looked at the audience, and the first thing I said is, oh my God, they're so young. So partly that's a sign that I'm now old enough to retire, but also it's wonderful to see so many new faces interested in service learning. So that's great. I'm going to talk about something that has been threading through the presentations that you've already heard, and something that you mentioned about continuity, and that is the reflection part of service learning.
On the right side for next.
Okay. So one way to remember this, if you haven't already heard this, this is not original to me, but that service learning should always have a hyphen in it, and that hyphen is the reflection. That component that's tying into the learning objectives that were mentioned. So it's the link between the experience in the community and the learning goals of the classroom. And just some outcomes, if you don't have good reflection, that without it, the service underachieves its role as an instrument of learning. I treat service learning as if it's another text. You spend as much time planning it, thinking about it, thinking through, harvesting the knowledge out of it as you would if you were picking a new book or a new text for the course. And in fact, if it's not harvested correctly, service learning can actually reinforce student negative stereotypes. So you can do some real damage. And I've had experience over the years with that we've been able to catch in some of the reflective writings or journals of students very early, and then speak to them about it. Or they would have gone on with their negative stereotypes and we would have merely reinforced them. So what is reflection? Well, just think of the common use of the word. Reflection is turning one's mind's eye into something that has already happened and get meaningful insights. But then another way we use the word reflection is that we're looking at our reflection in the mirror. And so I like to think of reflection in service learning as a combination of those two. So it's learning about what's out there, but it's also learning about the effect of that on ourselves. And I think many of you are really interested in pedagogy, and you've probably read about learning isn't real learning until it affects us at a pretty deep level. Sometimes they even talk about that at a moral level. And so I think that kind of reflection in an environment outside of the classroom can result in that. This is just that learning cycle that you may all have heard of, and it's a little hard to figure it out at first. But if you follow first the yellow circles, starting with you have an experience, you reflect on it, and then you make some generalizations from it, and then you apply those to a new experience, and then follow the orange circles, new experience, reflection, generalization, applying. So it's a spiral of learning that takes place with experiential learning, and if the reflection piece is missing, that's most likely not going to But reflection isn't something that you just tell the students to go reflect on this experience. You have to guide it. So there are different kinds of reflection and results of that, depending on the learning goals of the course. And I think any service learning course needs to have all 4 of these learning goals, and you need to articulate that to the students in the very beginning of the class. That there's the subject matter, the course goals. Depending on your discipline, these are the things that are going to be learned. The others are the skills, for instance, critical thinking, or communications, whether it's verbal communications or written communications, personal development, career exploration, effect on their own values, and then finally civic responsibility. That's where merely volunteering, or in some cases a clinical practice in the community, might not have the full force of service learning if there isn't the commitment to ongoing civic responsibility. So if it's going to be guided, we sometimes say it has to have prompts in whatever form it comes. And so these are just some examples of things that I've pulled out of student writings that could affect each of these. Application of the subject matter to the real world. Theory X, for instance, on the causes of poverty, does or does not fit in this particular case. The skills. I learned to conduct an interview. My style became more directive when working with the children of Sulphur Springs Elementary School. Personal development. I discovered that I really like to work with the elderly, or I discovered that I have difficulty working with people who, and fill in the blank. Civic responsibility. Kids need to become more involved in their community if their voice is to be heard, and this is a student at USF talking about kids as the Sulphur Springs Elementary students. So it needs to be, as I said earlier, continuous and parallel with the learning growth in the course itself. So again, you need to design it very carefully, and so it's really woven through the entire course. And so you want to make sure that it includes these 3 stages. The early, what are my first impressions? Some simple questions of what's happening, and try to get them to remove personal judgments. And then once they're comfortable in whatever that learning activity is, that they start moving to explanations of what's happening. And then finally, what impact does this have? How has it transformed me? And so that's the what, so what, and what now? And it requires not only that reflection be continuous throughout the course, but that you're giving continuous feedback. And I would argue that it probably has to be weekly, at most every 2 weeks, and some people do it a couple of times a week. So it's not just handed in at the end, because then you can't affect the learning of the students. And so the learning has to be guided, again, so that it can move up that spiral. And as was said before, we become facilitators of learning, not the instructors. We're not standing in front doing the what used to be described as the ATM system of teaching, which is we keep putting little deposits into students, and that at some point there's an exam, we press a button and out comes the learning. Whenever I think of that, I think of the movie Stepford Wives, and you see that, the wife that would give the husband money in that way. So your suggestive comments and not criticisms, because they're going to close down if you're really getting close to a nerve, for instance, about prejudices they have. If you just say, that's prejudicial, stop it. you've got to talk them through it. And ask to look for alternative explanations rather than saying that they're wrong. Look for change over time. Real learning is transformational. So the handout that you've got has lots of really interesting tools for reflection. And so just as the service learning should come from your goals for the course, the types of reflection that you use should likewise come from the learning that you want the students to have and how you think it can be best expressed and how you can best guide it. So the most common form is journals, and there are actually several kinds of journals that are mentioned in there. There's the first level, which is stream of consciousness, and then you read those and you make some comments. Highlighted means that you ask them to do something like the stream of consciousness, but then you ask them before they hand it in to highlight those things that they see as related to the course material. Double entry takes that a step further so that on a page they might have a left-hand column that's describing the experience, and the right-hand column is saying what they've learned from the experience, and then you can even draw arrows to match it. Critical incident journals, where it's about their aha moments, so that they describe what happened and how it changed them. Now when I say how it changed them, I'm not just talking about it made me a better person, although that's good. It made me less prejudiced, but how it changed them in terms of their understanding of fill in the blank with what your course is about. And then another individual type of reflection is more academic writing, reflective essays. It can be directed writings in that you're asking specific questions. It could be halfway through the semester, you're asking them what topics in the course are particularly relevant in their service learning project that they might want to do further research on. And so it becomes a more traditional research paper, but it's reflective because they've come up with it based on questions that they've started to ask based on their service learning experience. And then also necessary, I think, are what they call group reflections, and there are several of those types that are mentioned in the handout as well. And those can be as simple as structured class discussions. They can happen in a classroom, or